Welcome back to the show. Week 9, major news in politics this last week. The Supreme Court has been keeping themselves just a little bit busy when it comes to issues like the Voting Rights Act, DOMA, Prop 8, a number of major cases like that settled this week. But that's not what we're going to be talking about in the program. I feel like I've pretty much said everything I need to say on that on the main show and in conversations around the studio throughout the week. But there are a number of other major stories that have to some extent been buried by all of the Supreme Court news, and so we're going to be touching on those, both domestic and some major international stories, including one that I think it's actually pretty unfortunate that it has not yet been covered on the Young Turks. So, I mean, it's Saturday. No way we can really resolve that except to do it on my own program, and so that's what I'm going to do now. Week 3 of the protests in Brazil, they continue to take their toll, and nowhere is that toll stronger than in the approval ratings of Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil. A survey was done 3 weeks ago and today by Brazil's largest newspaper, and her approval ratings have tanked. They have gone from 57% prior to the protests, which is actually not that bad, down to 30% earlier today, losing almost half of her approval. And specifically, these are people saying that they think that the government is doing a good or a great job. Now, to put that in some American context, for instance, President Barack Obama over the past few months has had both the IRS scandal, the AP scandal, the NSA wiretapping, the data mining. There's still lingering questions over Benghazi if you're watching Fox News. All of those scandals, and he's lost 10% of his support, perhaps. But no, in Brazil, much stronger reaction coming out of those protests. As we said, about half of her approval. Now, if you're not familiar with the nature of these protests, they started a few weeks ago, and the initial impetus for them was some hikes in public transportation fees that Brazilians had major problems with. But similar to the protests in Turkey, what started as a very simple issue in response to one policy that was being pursued has now widened to include a number of different concerns, including government corruption, high taxes, poor public services, and the many billions of dollars that are being spent on next year's World Cup soccer tournament and also the 2016 Olympics that are going to be held in Rio. Now, more widely in Brazil, these protests are not just popular amongst the people protesting, which are incredibly large crowds, by the way. We've got some pictures for you. 81% polled by that large newspaper said that they support the nature and the goals of the protests. And what's interesting about this, we obviously started with the focusing on the drop in approval ratings for the president, but it's going to be an interesting question to see going into, I believe they have their next election next year, if it's going to take a real toll on her then, since it's not her specifically that is being hurt by this, but generally the entire government, all the parties concerned. The Brazilians tend to have a problem with all of them. We've got a quote from Pedro Arruda. He's a professor of political science at Catholic University in Sao Paulo. He says, the protest movement that began 2 weeks ago isn't necessarily a movement against the ruling Workers' Party, nor Dilma herself. It's a protest against the entire ruling class. The people are protesting all the parties. And so that's interesting. I mean, I think we've seen something like that in America. The Occupy protest that went on did have a problem with both the parties. In Turkey, you're seeing not quite so much focused on the entire government, but that's the nature of the protests in Brazil right now. Now, moving forward, what's going to happen, the protests will continue. There were rumors of a general strike that was supposed to happen on Monday, but the Brazil's two main unions, the Central Workers Union and the Union Force, say that they are not planning that. Instead, and I found this to be kind of interesting, they're planning a national work slowdown for July 11th, where workers will only perform strictly what's required of them on the job. Now, I understand that in some senses that seems more, I guess, reasonable and less likely to turn people against the protest movement, but it also seems much less likely to make much of a difference, I think. But look, they're the major unions. I guess they know what they're doing. Now, in response to these protests 3 weeks in, the government has made a couple of moves to try to quell some of the popular resistance to the government. Earlier, just this week, the president announced $23 billion in transportation investments, attempting possibly to undercut the initial concern of the protest movement. And also, she said that the government in the near future would be prioritizing a number of different reforms, including fiscal responsibility, the control of inflation, general political reforms, healthcare, public transport, and education. Now, similar to in Turkey, They have attempted to make some reforms there to try to take the wind out of the sails of the protest movement. I don't know if it'll be more successful in Brazil, judging by the size of the crowds and just the massive amount of anger that's been building up in that population. I kind of have my doubts that these are going to be enough to quell it. But we will continue to watch the situation in Brazil as it develops. And I guess I would have to say that as an American who rooted for the Occupy movement and was pretty disappointed when it fell apart without accomplishing much of its goals, I wish them the best. Now, moving to the US, where we're dealing with our own problems right now. Glenn Greenwald, the journalist for The Guardian, who was instrumental in conjunction with Edward Snowden in revealing the major information coming out of the NSA in regard to data mining, wiretapping, and all of the various ways that our privacy is being destroyed day by day in the United States, is not done with his leaks and his revelations yet. While the piece that he's referring to in the video we're going to show you is not yet revealed, he's going to give us a little taste of what more the NSA is doing to break our privacy rights. Let's watch.
It talks about how a brand new technology enables the National Security Agency to redirect into its own repositories 1 billion cell phone calls every single day. 1 billion cell phone calls every single day. What we are really talking about here is a globalized system that prevents any form of electronic communication from taking place without its being stored and monitored by the National Security Agency. It doesn't mean they're listening to every call. It means they're storing every call and have the capability to listen to them at any time. And it does mean that they're collecting millions upon millions upon millions of our phone and email records. It is a globalized system designed to destroy all privacy.
So I have to say that when I first saw that video, I was astounded by the number there. 1 billion phone calls every single day. I understand that we have some powerful computers in the world now, but that still seems pretty mind-boggling. I also wouldn't have guessed that there even were 1 billion phone calls a day, but hey, I guess Glenn Greenwald knows better than me. But anyway, so just as we had to try to figure out in the wake of the data mining, the wiretapping, the recording of phone information, the ability to tap into computers and things like that, the real question coming out of this newest revelation is, will the American public care at all? Now, the political class, us pundits, believe of course they're going to care about it. Their rights are being taken away. This is hardly American. It's super unconstitutional. And yet, we've seen the surveys coming out of the last few weeks after the previous rounds of revelations coming out of Greenwald and Snowden, and the American public doesn't seem to care as much as we would hope. So, latest polls coming out of during June said that when weighing the competing interests of investigating terrorism by invading our privacy in this way and concerns for their privacy, people 62% to 34% were more worried about national security. Now, I believe that this is kind of a false framing of what's up at stake right now. It's a false dichotomy. Having these programs does not mean that we're going to stop terrorism. After all, we had the Boston bombings long after these programs were put in place. And so I have to say that as someone who follows politics very closely, has a lot of hope for the future of America, it's more than a little disheartening that the American public doesn't seem to care about their constitutional rights being shredded. Now, I hope that Glenn Greenwald, in revealing this, and granted, this was at the Socialism Conference in Chicago, not going to get a lot of coverage. Perhaps when he actually publishes his piece revealing this information, there will be more coverage of it. I hope that people will care. I hope that when he reveals the other little juicy tidbits about the NSA that we don't currently know, that people will care. Something needs to be done, because really, I think Obama and the government, and also the Republicans, hoping that they will be in power in the next few years, they're watching to see what the response of the American public is going to be to this information coming out. And if 2-to-1 people think it's perfectly fine, why would the government do anything to curtail these actions? If anything, they would expand them in the future. It's only natural. The American public seems to be saying, we're okay with it. And that, as a liberal, I think is extremely unfortunate. Now, Snowden is out there. We don't know exactly where. We believe he's in Moscow. Now, we did send Cenk Uygur to find him in Moscow, and we don't currently know if he was able to do so. I guess the phone lines to Moscow are not all that robust. But Obama also was speaking recently about Snowden. Now, when asked what he was going to do to track down Snowden, Obama tried to make light of the importance of tracking down the leaker. He said that he wasn't going to be scrambling jets to track down a 29-year-old hacker. And as you can expect, many in both politics, in religion, different conservative organizations took this as an opportunity to hit him over the head with these quotes. Let's watch a little montage.
Ecuador is basically laughing in the U.S.'s face over this.
Putin is schooling Obama, and it breaks our heart. Putin would love the opportunity to stick his finger in the president's eye, and he's doing that with this. It has become clear who's running the Middle East and who's running the world right now, quite frankly. And that is a very, very dangerous position for the United States. But it just goes to show you how the mighty have fallen. The president should show some leadership, some spine, and let our enemies as well as our allies know that we mean business.
I am shocked that the president has not picked up the phone and weighed in on this situation with the presidents of China and Russia to protect American national security.
It simply shows the limitations of our president's international influence. It certainly is waning.
Wasn't electing Obama supposed to make the rest of the world like us and respect us?
And I find it absolutely heartbreaking, appalling, disgusting that our commander-in-chief continues to display this kind of or this lack of leadership around the world.
Yeah, I think the president's remark was kind of flippant, and I don't think it gives justice to this grave matter that the country's facing.
Boy, that's the most arrogant display I think I've ever seen from this president.
We have a novice in this president. He should be on the phone, back channels, talking to Putin, talking to Xi, talking to whoever he has to, and letting them know in no uncertain terms that we want this guy, we are going to get this guy, they can help us or they can create an issue.
And we can have a lot of influence. We need to go ahead, use that influence right now with these countries like China and Russia, who seem to be thumbing their nose up the president as well as America.
For him to stand there in just such a weakened position continues again, Stuart, to show the world that that the commander-in-chief of the United States is no commander-in-chief at all.
Now, what I love about those quotes there is the people on the right who have a problem with Obama can't seem to decide exactly what they have a problem with him for. They're saying right there, you're not doing enough to track down this hacker. Snowden revealed national security information and we need to get him. You need to scramble those jets, Obama. But at the same time, just a week or two ago, they were saying, oh my God, I can't believe the NSA is doing this, wiretapping, data mining, finding out all this private information about us. Obama, how could you dare okay these programs? So which is it? Is your problem that the programs exist or that they were revealed by Snowden? I suppose in some sense, since nobody's going to hold you accountable, it is, I guess, apparently just fine to have a problem with both of those. But for a program like this that tries to keep the politicians accountable, it seems kind of suspect. Now, Cantor, the former CIA officials, all of the pundits, Hannity's going to be speaking about this, I'm sure, Rush Limbaugh. I think that you can have a problem with the programs. I have a problem with the programs. Now, I believe that there's some intellectual dishonesty to your position there, since in a few years, if a Republican is elected to the presidency, I have a feeling you're going to make a pretty quick 360, or I suppose 180, and have no problem whatsoever with the programs. But I would like some consistency here, especially because with the American public not having enough of a problem with these programs and Democrats not being willing to do anything to stop them, right now our only attempt, perversely enough, our only chance, I guess, perversely enough to do anything about these programs is that the Republicans will be able to generate some sort of opposition to them. And if their offense against Obama is as scattershot and weird and obviously hypocritical and obviously self-serving as this, I don't think that's going to be enough to get anything done to stop these programs. And since we have a closing window, a rapidly closing window on when the government might be willing to do something to stop some of these invasions of our privacy, that's not a good situation to be in. Okay. Moving to some lighter news. Not everything is as serious as the Constitution being shredded. Louie Gohmert is clearly a scientist, a philosopher, a deep thinker about a number of different subjects, but did you know that he's also an expert on the subject of sex, especially when it comes to sex education for the youth of America? Well, he is, and when you find out why he cares so much about this topic, you're going to hate him even more than you probably already do. So he was speaking to the Christian Conservative Wall Builders Live radio program, massive program. I'm sure many of you are daily watchers of it. And he was talking about why he thinks it's a bad idea for us to teach kids sex education, particularly young kids sex education. And this is what he said. Let the kids be innocent. Let them dream. Let them, play. That's kind of weird. Let them enjoy their life. You don't have to force the sexuality stuff into their life at such a point. It was never intended to be that way. They'll find out soon enough. Mankind has existed for a pretty long time without anyone else having to give a sex ed lesson to anybody. And now we feel like, oh gosh, people are too stupid unless we force them to sit and listen to instructions. It's just incredible. Now here's the problem with that. That may sound good to people who don't think much before they okay a policy or I guess policy preferences, but that's kind of stupid because we do have problems in America. We have problems with teenage pregnancy. We have problems with the transmission of STDs. I, for one, think that maybe taking away a little bit of their wide-eyed childhood innocence is worth it if it stops them from having kids when they're 16 or giving each other antibiotic-resistant gonorrhea and things like that. I think that that's a fine trade to make. And since Louie Gohmert, I have to assume, is incredibly pro-life, you would think he would be willing to make that trade as well. But no, and one of the reasons he's not willing to make the trade is because of, similar to Glenn Beck, the looming specter of the Soviet Union. What does that have to do with this? You would think nothing, but let's listen to how he tells it. And it reminds me so much of the summer that I was an exchange student in the Soviet Union back in the 70s, and I was shocked when they were saying, no, the children don't belong to parents, they belong to the state. And if any parent said anything in front of their children negative about the wonderful Soviet Union, then we will take their children away and give them to somebody more deserving. And I just thought how horribly shocking that was. That of course parents were the ones who loved the children, not the state. And I thought, well, thank God that we don't have that in our country. Yes, thank God that we don't have that in our country. Thank God that we're nowhere close to that, and increasing sex education for the youth of America would not bring us any closer to that. What the hell are you thinking, Louie Gohmert? I mean, I suppose when you're on a program like Wall Builders Live, you can count on both a fairly robust lack of education of the people listening to you and a need to strike out as a pretty extreme fellow. So maybe you have to bring up things like the Soviet Union. I guess we should only be happy that he didn't bring up Mao or Ceausescu or something like that. But this is not what sex education is about. It's about producing a better life for these kids once they become teenagers, once they become adults. When they become sexually active, we want them to be prepared for that, to know things about STDs and how to practice safe sex and things like that. When he would otherwise, I imagine, be speaking about the sexual morals of America, about probably STDs, certainly abortion and teen pregnancy and single moms and things like that, I have a feeling he's not going to strike up a tone that is so deeply relying on references to the Soviet Union. Now, maybe I'm the one being ridiculous since I'm expecting some sort of intellectual or philosophical consistency from Mr. Louie Gohmert. I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Now, Pam Geller is a very famous Islamophobe, right-wing activist, blogger. She's been in the news before for sponsoring some extremely anti-Islam posters and things like that were on New York subways, I should say, not sandwiches. You can't currently sponsor any messages on Subway sandwiches that I know of. But she is very active in denouncing Islam in America. And she was hoping to do so in the UK as well. She was going to be traveling over there to attend a rally being put on by the far-right English Defense League, which is by many organizations considered to be a hate group. She wanted to go to the rally, but she's not going to be able to. UK is banning her. Not from the rally, from the country, which is kind of an interesting concept. Since, she says some pretty outrageous things, but she's not exactly a terrorist or anything like that. But no, she is being banned under the country's unacceptable behavior policy. Now, I'm going to give my take on whether or not that makes sense, or we should have something like that here in the US. But first, let's hear Pam Geller's response to this. She says, in a striking blow against freedom, the British government has banned us from entering the country. Mohammed al-Arifi, who has advocated Jew hatred, wife-beating, and jihad violence, entered the UK recently with no difficulty. In not allowing us into the country solely because of our true and accurate statements about Islam, the British government is behaving like a de facto Islamic state. The nation that gave the world the Magna Carta is dead. I checked into it. It's not currently dead. The UK still does exist. It still functions day to day. It's just not functioning with Pam Geller within. And so I don't approve of her response to this, simply because some Islamic cleric was able to get into the country, maybe because he doesn't have quite as high a profile as you, Pam Geller, since you're always sponsoring hateful messages on the side of things like, or I should say, as frequently traveled as the New York subway system. Yeah, he got in there, okay. I don't know what he was intending to do there. I assume they're watching him if he's some sort of threat, but you were going to be attending a far-right rally. You were probably going to be engaging in at least a little bit of light hate speech. And so I suppose if that's their policy, it's their right to exercise that. Now, it's noteworthy that Pam Geller is not the only person who's been banned from entering the UK under this policy. Some other people have been banned. Radio host Michael Savage, who is one of the most offensive and possibly worst people in America. He had a program on MSNBC for about 27 minutes, and then he was thrown off because he is too crazy even for cable news. Florida pastor Terry Jones, who is famous for wanting to burn Quran, I believe. Rapper Snoop Lion, so that's interesting. And now Islamophobic activist Pam Geller. So that's quite a little group she's gotten herself involved in there. I should say at this point, I don't know what Snoop Lion did to get banned from the UK. I think it's too bad for music lovers in Britain who might want to listen to his music. But I will say my take on this, I'm not in favor of this. Now, obviously, we don't have a program like this in America. Certainly, people can be banned from entering, but not because of things they've said in the past. They would have to pose some sort of clear and obvious threat to American security or the American population or something like that. That's a premise, or that's a policy that we've had for a long time, and I think it's worked fairly well for us. So I'm not in favor of this. I personally think, and this has proven controversial on TYTU before when I've said this, I think that when people have absolutely horrid opinions, it's a good thing when they express them. Because all too often, it's easy to forget that some of the philosophical or rhetorical excesses of the past are not gone just because we don't see them. There are Nazis still in the world. There are anti-Semitic people still in the world. There are absolutely horrid racists still in the world, sometimes on food and cooking programs. And so sometimes it's a good thing to be reminded of that. And if that means that they get to put on a little march and Sieg Heil and things like that, I think that that's an okay price to pay. I think that they will do the job of making themselves look ridiculous and making their worldview seem antiquated for you. And honestly, and look, people are already saying this in the wake of Pam Geller being banned, this only serves to create her as sort of a martyr figure for the English Defense League right now. And that's the last thing we want to happen. Now, another thing we would like to not happen, a man getting jailed for a little bit of perfectly acceptable American-style protest. Generally in America, in the last few years, the big banks have been no arrest zones. Any kind of wrongdoing can be going on there and you're not going to be arrested. But it turns out that if you're on the sidewalk in front of it, you can be arrested, even if you're just protesting in a very innocent and I think completely harmless way. So I'm referring here to Jeff Olson of San Diego. And a while back, not even this year, back between February and August of 2012, he was protesting his opposition to the big banks by chalking some slogans on the sidewalk. There were some pretty offensive, pretty extreme slogans like, "No thanks, big banks," and "Shame on Bank of America." Maybe he wanted to say something more extreme after that little intro, but he ran out of chalk or something, I don't know. And so he is being arrested, and he might actually go to jail for this. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a month. He might go to jail for 13 years, and he might have to also pay $13,000 in restitution. I don't know if there's some weird correlation between number of years and amount of restitution, but it seems to line up pretty well there. Now, some say that this doesn't have as much to do with the banks and more to do with sort of a power-obsessed attorney general in that area. There's this weird political feud going on between a man that Jeff Olson had worked for and that attorney general. I don't know if that's the case, but I do think it's interesting that it was a protest against the banks that led to this. And I think it's pretty obvious that considering the slogans and the fact that he was just using chalk, that seems like a very extreme response. But he says, to completely clarify it, that he always did it on city sidewalks. It was washable chalk. I think all chalk is pretty much washable, but maybe this is extremely washable. They were never crude messages, which seems to bear out from what we've seen. They were never vulgar, and they were clearly topical. Look, I, as a college student, chalked more offensive things out in front of my dorm, and I didn't have to go to jail for even 13 hours, let alone a decade and a third. And this is ridiculous. This is not even just ridiculous because he's being arrested. It's actually ridiculous if you're the banks. Because we've gone extremely easy on the banks. They really dodged a bullet. And the last thing they need right now is to appear to be, not even really Big Brother, but to just be so above the law and so harsh in cracking down on average Americans. They already do enough of that when it comes to repossessing houses and things like that. But if this guy goes to jail for 13 years, which it might be a much shorter term, that's totally possible at this point, that is going to make Bank of America look absolutely horrible. And you can bet that it's going to appear in anti-BOA ads in the future. So whether you're just an average person who wants Americans to continue to have the ability to protest in a nonviolent way, or if you're an executive at Bank of America or the other big banks, this isn't a good thing for anyone. Now, at this point, we've got a couple more stories we're going to get to. I am going to take a short break, rest my voice for a minute, but stay tuned. We've got some awesome info on the unveilment of the first monument for atheists in America. We've got updates on Paula Deen and also a new fat tax at an airline, but not what you might expect. Be back in just a minute. Back on the show, we've got a number of awesome stories for you, so stay tuned. First, we're going to be starting off with an update on Christianity and atheism in America and the constant struggle between them. When I was growing up, I was taught, I think, fairly obviously and fairly early about the separation of church and state, and it would seem like that would be enough to stop religious monuments and other expressions of religious faith on government property, you would think. But this is America, and so in many states, including Florida, there's been a concerted effort by Christians to put up as many Ten Commandments and crosses and things like that as they can. And now, finally, there's a bit of pushback from atheists. So they have unveiled just this morning a monument in Florida. We've got some details on you. It's a 1,500-pound granite bench with quotes from Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and also the founder of American Atheists. Now, it might seem like, you know, if you're opposed to the Christian monuments, you should be opposed to the atheist monuments as well. And we will certainly get to that. But first, I want to talk about the strategy behind the creation and implementation of this monument and the other monuments to come, because this will not be the last one. So we have American Atheist President David Silverman. He was talking about why they did this. And he said, we're not going to let them, they're referring to Christians who've set up monuments like this at courts and things like that, we're not going to let them do it without a counterpoint. If they do it without a counterpoint, it's going to appear very strongly that the government actually endorses one religion over another, or I should say, religion in general over non-religion. He says also that when these monuments are put up historically over the last few years, it's often defended under the idea of freedom of speech, that, you know, this isn't forcing religion on anyone, it's simply allowing different groups to put up the statues and things like that that are important to them. He says that that's one of the tricks that's used because they go up and call it a free speech zone and then they're unopposed. They get their government legitimization because nobody else calls their bluff and puts something in. Now, I think in an ideal world, the counter punch to this would not have been putting up an atheist monument. I personally think that neither of them really have much to do with federal courts in the first place. I think that having neither of them would have been a good place to start. But that battle has been fought over the last few years, and atheists and non-Christians, even the ones with belief, have lost that at this point. and the Supreme Court doesn't seem to really care at all. And so I guess this was the only legitimate or possible move. And so they have an anonymous donor, by the way, that's been funding for these monuments. I don't know how much each one costs. It is £1,500, so you'd imagine a lot. But they are going to be putting up 50 in total. So there were some big dollars being dished out on this. And I should also say, so this one is an atheist monument. Now, I am an atheist. If you would expect that I would just have a knee-jerk reaction of support for it, you're pretty off base, I would say, in this case. I like the quotes that they're using. They're in no way offensive. I think that this could create some sort of dialogue about the role of religion and atheism in public. I suppose that's sort of the mission statement. But I'm not a huge fan. I think that you should go to court to have your lawsuits settled, maybe, to try to receive, or if you're on the other side, dispense justice. I think that's historically what it's been for. These really don't have anything to do with it. It's an unnecessary battle. And while I suppose, as I said, there could be the discussion, you see the atheist monument and you think, oh, I forgot, there are atheists in America. That could be a good thing. I also always worry, especially as an atheist who uses Reddit, that these sorts of displays could just piss people off. Now, as I said, they were very careful with the quotes that they chose. They're not offensive. There's nothing anti-faith necessarily in them. But I'm always worried about the possibility of harming the movement by pissing people off. So I guess I have to say to David Silverman, it's an impressive move to be able to raise that much money, and I'm sure it's going to generate a huge amount of press attention for you. But I worry a little bit that this might set a precedent that will only lead to more religious and specifically Christian monuments on government property. Paula Deen's horrible month continues, so we're going to give you an update on the news in regard to her business dealings, which one continue, which ones have been eliminated, and I also want to respond a little bit to some of the commentary in the comment section under the last Paula Deen video we covered, but we're going to do that in just a couple of minutes. First, she lost not only her latest book deal, it was almost certainly going to be a bestseller. That has now been suspended. Her business dealings with Walmart, with the Food Network, are currently kaput. Now, could she come back in the future? Certainly, but many of her deals are currently at least suspended, if not terminated. Also, by the way, I thought this is sort of an interesting one. I didn't know that she had this business dealing, but she worked with Novo Nordisk, which is a pharmaceutical company that deals with diabetes drugs, and she had some sort of sponsorship with them. Now, they're not saying that they've terminated the business dealings with her. They've just suspended it for now. I imagine they're very closely watching how people are going to continue to respond to Paula Deen, but it's currently suspended. As I said, she lost her TV shows, she lost her book deal, so it hasn't been going very well for her. Now, obviously, if you're Paula Deen, this is not a good time for you. She recently got a crisis manager, a fairly famous one that I wasn't previously familiar with, but it's going to help her try to get through this. And look, the way the attention span of America works, in a month or 3 months or certainly 6 months, there's no reason why Paula Deen couldn't make some sort of epic return, rising out of the ashes as a phoenix, or I guess out of, burnt food crumbs or something like that. That might be more topical. And so I don't doubt that she'll be able to make millions more in the future. I think that personally she should take this as an opportunity to go independent and start a major YouTube food network. That seems like that would be possibly more lucrative in the future, and she could use that to launch product lines and books and things like that. But anyway, so that's the state of her business dealings. When it comes to the actual situation with Paula Deen, a lot of people responded to the video by saying, why are you so mean to her? Like, she made a mistake, or is it so bad that she's racist? Or simply saying that what she did was not racist. I'm not really going to debate that. I think that if you don't think that some of the videos we showed you were racist, I don't think you can be convinced otherwise. I mean, she pointed to a black background and said, I have a friend as black as this. That's pretty damn racist. But I will say, the comments first. The things that she said, I'm white. I find racism to be somewhat offensive, but obviously I'm not personally offended by the comments. They didn't destroy my life or anything like that. I simply reported them to you. But they did bother a lot of people, not universally, but many people. And initially, the Food Network, the strongest business connection she had, decided to terminate her contract. Now, should they have done that? I think that's sort of an interesting philosophical question. Many people seem to imply in the comments that they shouldn't have, but the thing is, they're free to employ whoever they want, and they obviously got rid of her because they believe that she's going to damage them financially in the future. If they think that they're going to lose money because of her, Why would they employ her? And if you have a major problem with their move to fire her, I think there's sort of an underlying assumption there, or an implication that, they shouldn't be allowed to fire her? Which is odd, because you certainly wouldn't have said that months before the racism was revealed. And so it's sort of a weird world, a weird twisted bizarro land where you're allowed to fire a non-racist, but once someone reveals themselves as a racist, you better not fire them. That's weird. Doesn't really compute with America, and I think that they were free to do what they did. Now, on the converse, if they decided to keep her employed, I think that they're free to do that. We don't prosecute people for thought crimes. Being a racist is not illegal in America. It's just unwise if you want to make a lot of money in a very public way, unless you're on Fox News or something like that. And so I think they were free to do what they did. But I should point out that many people also attacked me directly. I assume not actual viewers of the program on a regular basis, but just really worked up Paula Deen fans, saying, why am I attacking her? Look, I'm just showing you videos that she publicly took. She was saying these things. It wasn't under interrogation or anything like that. And also, the real problem that I have is not the things that she said, but it's the way that she ran her business. And so why we're finding out about much of this is because of the testimony, the written depositions and all that's coming out. These are because of lawsuits. The lawsuits came about because of the way that she ran her business. For instance, the most, I think, egregious example was not allowing dark-skinned African Americans to be in public relations sort of positions in the company. She felt apparently that people would be uncomfortable with extremely dark-skinned African Americans. That goes beyond just what you think about people a little bit, or maybe an off-the-cuff remark or something like that. That's the way you run your business. That's the sort of discrimination that is not legal. You can think whatever you want, but there are protections in terms of how you run your business when it comes to race amongst other protected groups like religion and sexual orientation and things like that. And that's where it becomes a major problem. You're allowed to think whatever you want. To some extent, you're allowed to say whatever you want. And certainly in America, if Amanda Bynes is any example, you're allowed to tweet whatever you want. But when you actually are impeding people's progress within the company because of your racist beliefs and your racist upbringing, that's where it becomes a major problem. So that's all the Paula Deen we've got for you today. Unfortunately, no new juicy quotes or videos came up, but we will be watching at least for a week until we, like the rest of America, forget about it, and then a few months go by and she comes back and starts selling ways to make tastier donuts or something. That's gonna happen. Now, speaking of food, or at least the effects of food, you may have heard of fat taxes on airlines. There's at least one, Samoa Air has a fat tax where if you weigh more, you have to pay more to be on the plane. And there are certainly other airlines that have considered doing this at various times. Now, they're extremely controversial, especially in America, where we're both fatter than average and also very defensive about being fat. But it sort of makes sense, kind of. I mean, the plane does require fuel. You use more fuel if the plane is heavier, and so if you are unnecessarily, I guess, burdening down the plane, maybe you should pay more. We'll have that debate on another episode. But an Indian airline known as GoAir is instituting sort of a fat tax, but not on their passengers, and that's what makes it so interesting. So in the future, they're only going to be hiring women. And the reason is that women on average are 15 to 20 kilograms lighter than men. I don't know what employment laws are like in India. I would have to imagine that would not be legal here, especially because it would seem to be a bullshit reason to only hire women. If it was happening in America, and probably in India as well, we would assume it has to be because we think that the women are sexier, that more people will want to fly in the planes or something like that. That's sort of the stereotypical idea of stewardesses, which we've moved past to some extent. You'll have to watch episodes of Mad Men to see it in the present day. Now, the airline's CEO, the GoAir's CEO, Giorgio Doroni, who I have to imagine is not an India native, he says that this is not the only way that they're trying to cut weight. That he also said the size of in-flight magazines has been reduced. The potable water tanks are no longer being filled to capacity, as only 35 to 40% of that water is actually used. Now, that also sounds kind of BS. I have to imagine that cutting out a couple pages of the magazine isn't going to relieve the plane of a lot of weight. But if you believe their math, changing out the male stewardesses and flight attendants for females will save them up to $500,000 a year, which is certainly a considerable amount of money. But I would have to imagine that that's not, for one, the best way to save money. Possibly not the actual reason they're doing it. I think that it possibly is just a way of advertising that, look, there's a lot of women on the plane or something like that. And the reason that I believe that, and the reason that I think that this would never work in America, is if your reasoning for only hiring women is that they're 15 to 20 kilograms lighter, why don't you just have a policy where you only hire light people? Or a man who weighs 15 to 20 kilograms lighter than the average man could be hired. Because the policy as it stands seems to indicate that even if you're lean as a rail, as a man, you cannot be hired. And there certainly seems to be nothing there that if a very voluptuous woman were to apply for GoAir, that she would not be accepted. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Interesting note, they are of course not going to be applying this to current employees, so if you're a guy or perhaps an overweight woman right now working for GoAir, you're not going to get the boot. But in the future, it will have an influence on how they hire. As the price of airline tickets goes up, as other airlines attempt to find ways to save money, it's going to be interesting to see if this spreads stateside. They've pretty much done everything they can do here, from making you pay for every single piece of luggage you check to making you pay for the Sprite and the nuts that you eat on your flight. Maybe this is a bold new world for airlines to go in. Anyway, I want to give you an update on news that we spoke about a month ago. Earlier last month, Tesla was hit by a couple of lawsuits, or pieces of legislation, I should say, in North Carolina and Texas that would have made it basically impossible for them to function in those states. And it was grim times for Tesla because other states were watching this and could possibly try other pieces of legislation similar in their own states. But now, at least in North Carolina, and we're seeing glimmers of this in states like New York, things are looking a lot better for them. So the bill that was going to take place in North Carolina, which at the time had passed in the Senate, did not receive as good of a welcome in the House, and it's currently being scuttled. And for possibly an interesting reason, actually. So Tom Tills, as the Speaker of the House, right before they were going to vote on this, he got a test drive in a Tesla Model S. Sort of weird timing there, and he's not in favor of the legislation anymore. Tesla's Director of Public Policy, James Chen, was asked whether or not he thinks that this test drive had an effect, and he was like, I'm sure it did. Now, they didn't give him a Tesla. It wasn't like a bribe or anything like that, but maybe the simple act of driving an all-electric car that's extremely luxurious on the inside and can do 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds while also going over 280 miles on one electric charge, maybe that's enough to sway his mind. But at least in North Carolina, which had seemed like ground zero for these sorts of laws, it's not going to happen. We'll have to see next year if they take it up. A couple of senators are quoted here as saying they're not going to go back to it, but you never know. There was also a bill in New York State that would have made it impossible for Tesla to register any retail locations. That also is not going to happen now. It could be pushed back until next year, although again, some senators are saying they're unlikely to take it up. We don't know in New York if test drives had anything to do with it, but that's a possibility. And also, on a separate note, I recently saw that New Hampshire specifically had legislation saying Tesla could open stores in their state. Since this is a U.S. automaker, since it is doing extremely well, having repaid its loan to the U.S. government 9 years earlier than expected, turning a profit, and also developing powertrains and batteries for other companies, including Toyota and Mercedes-Benz, it seems like you would not want to ban this company from operating your state and possibly in the future opening up factories in your state. That seems like wise business sense to me, although I'm not receiving checks from third-party dealer lobbyists, so I guess I don't have the financial incentive to act in a way that Texas at least currently is. And so I find this to be great news as a potential future EV buyer, as someone who wants American auto manufacturers to be the best in the world, and someone who, despite my liberal roots, believes pretty firmly in the free market. I want to see companies like this able to engage in business in all states. And I especially like that you knock these down early, you take it out in North Carolina, you take it out in New York, and maybe it'll stop other states from doing it. And honestly, on a personal note, anything that makes the third-party car dealers angry, I'm a big fan of because they seem like a bunch of tools. Finally, that's all the news we have for you, I guess. I would love to cover more, but since I'm the one making the graphics for these and editing them, there's limited time. But I want to make time for some community engagement. This is week 9 of the weekly roundup, where I respond to your comments and questions on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube comments as well. Yeah, we get them from all those sources. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to answer for you, some awesome ones coming in. Alana Nixon says, Hey John, I was wondering if you know of any shows similar to TYT that cover Canadian news. Unfortunately, I don't currently know of any that are similar, I guess, in format or the way they cover the news, that sort of thing, that deal specifically with Canada. Maybe you can search. But I do have some good news for you. I know, at least anecdotally, Steve-O, the COO of the Young Turks, has said that we do want to expand into other markets. He's specifically mentioned Britain and Australia, but I think I've heard him mention Canada as well. So hold your breath, maybe in a year or two, there will be TYT Canada. Next, coming from 5 Oodings. John, what's your take on a viable future third U.S. political party as an alternative to the Republicrats? I don't personally have the view of the current two-party system that some people do. I think that it's a little bit healthier than some people, their sort of apocalyptic views of how it's going. And the reason that I think that is also the reason that I think that a major third party or a lingering multi-election third party is unlikely to come about. And that is that the way that elections are structured in America, it's extremely difficult for a third party to have an impact in multiple elections. So to even be on the ballot in many states, you have to have had a certain showing, a percentage showing in the previous election. In some states it's 3 or 4%, some states it's 5%. And so unless you hit that mark, in the next election you're not even going to be on the ballot, and so it becomes even harder to be involved in multiple elections. Also, with the sheer amount of money it takes to run a competitive campaign in the state or on the federal level, it's very hard for that. Now, these states have the established parties, both the Republicans and the Democrats, one of the things they're best at is raising money. It's hard, actually, like in auto manufacturers, for a startup to compete. And finally, the parties, both the Republicans and the Democrats, it's easy to see them as very static organizations. But one way that they're particularly robust, one way that they're particularly adaptable, is when they see a new interest group making a big impact on an election, like the Green Party, for instance, did a couple of elections ago. One of the parties will have an incentive to incorporate that, to digest that, and have those people vote for them in the future. And so we've seen that a couple of times. I mean, sort of the Christian right becoming an increasingly strong part of the Republican Party, the Greens with the Democrats, and things like that, environmentalists, everything. And so for those reasons and many more, which I'm sure you can find multiple dissertations on, it's probably not going to happen. Let's see. Sports News Maniac said, do you ever regret not finishing up your PhD? Dr. Iadarola has such a badass ring to it. I do regret it in some ways, I suppose. I think it's natural to regret, I guess, what you don't have when you make a major life decision. And I'm sure at some point in the future, I will look back and think, if I just held in there and I just finished, the last 6 or 9 years, I would have had it. That would have been great. But no, in general, I don't regret the decision at all. I am in the best position in my life right now. I like pretty much every aspect of my life, and that can be, for the most part, tied into making the decision to not finish my PhD. So no major regrets yet. Finally, last comment here from Linda Hewitt. What's the best first-person shooter game in your opinion? I just really want to blow some shit up with a smiley face. You weren't super specific there. Now, granted, you only have 140 characters, but I don't know if you mean historically or in the present, single player versus multiplayer, so I'll mention a few. Probably one of the ones that has made the most impact on me was GoldenEye. For local multiplayer, it's one of the best first-person shooters ever. I don't think that we would have the multiplayer first-person shooters we have now with the features they have if not for GoldenEye, which especially on consoles showed that first-person shooters can work in that format. I don't think we would have had Halo necessarily. Previous to these games, first-person shooters only really happened on PCs because it was believed that the controllers just weren't adaptable enough. So there's definitely GoldenEye. I also enjoyed Halo and Halo 2 multiplayer. I mean, I guess in terms of story, both Half-Life and the Dead Space series have been very important, I think, in advancing what we believe a first-person shooter story can be like. I'm probably missing a whole bunch of others that are similar in that regard. I think Borderlands is very interesting. There's a lot. I can't really choose, but those are some ones that stand out. I would love to answer much more comments, but I've gone over a little bit. And so if you have questions or comments you'd like to see on next week's Weekly Roundup, feel free to leave them in the comments section. You can tweet them to me at @JIadarola or go to facebook.com/ I believe John Iadarola fan. I don't know, search on Facebook. Somebody set it up. I don't know who actually controls it, but you can leave comments there as well, and I look forward to reading those. So that's all the time we have for episode 9 of the show. I want to thank you for sticking it out through what felt like 47 to 49 minutes of the program. If you have ideas for stories, I am very amenable constantly to your input in terms of what you'd like to see covered on the show, so feel free to let me know about that, and I'll see you next week.